The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. It's a good time for productive outrage, says Nanaimo's new poet laureate. Neil Surkan is getting ready to start a 2-year term in the position on December 1st. The poet laureate is the city's literary ambassador. Surkan is a professor of English at Vancouver Island University with 2 full-length poetry collections under his belt. Also on today's show, Jackie Wong is going to be bringing light to some lost intersections in Nanaimo with a new temporary public art project that will highlight the sites of the city's old Chinatowns. To kick things off, we're going to hear from Neil Surkan, who spoke with CHLY reporter Lauryn Mackenzie ahead of starting his new role.
I started out wanting to be in bands, so I played lots of tunes growing up in the Okanagan. So I grew up in Penticton, BC. And yeah, I was obsessed with the idea of playing music live. And that was my goal actually when I started at university. I just wanted to be a musician. And then I took a modern poetry course. It was my first ever university course in English, and I fell in love with the difficulty or the complexity of it. And so I started writing my own stuff. And the greatest act of generosity I ever received from a professor was when I shared some of my early work, and he didn't say, "It's bad." He said, "I would wait to publish." And so I took another almost 10 years or so before I really in earnest started sending things out, and just fell more deeply in love with just the modes of attention that are requested of us, I guess, by poems. And so what's kind of happened in my own writing has been that I think my first book, which was called On High, came out in 2018, was still just writing a series of almost love letters to the poets who had kind of lit me up. And it wasn't until this second collection that came out in 2021 called Unbecoming, where I really found that my own voice started to feel true, I think. And that came down in a lot of ways to having a child. So when my son was born, I just suddenly realized that a different kind of frankness was required of me. I wanted to just show up in the world in a way that I could be proud of to my son. So the authenticity of my language changed a little bit then. So that's kind of been the journey, is from awe and just earnest engagement with the difficulty of poetry to this idea that poems can come from somewhere else in the body when they're tied to, I guess, love. Yeah.
How would you describe the differences of what you were doing as probably a teenager writing music lyrics to what you do now?
I actually think there's been a return, which is that at the beginning there was just an earnestness. There's also a sense of outrage that was kind of tying through in the work. And I think now is a good time for productive outrage, and also a good time for just like a belief in the words that we use. And so, yeah, there's a different frankness in my poems again that wasn't there in my first book. I love that first book because it's sly and it's interested in creating analogies and ideas that request that the reader come with the poems, whereas these ones are more in an earnest conversation. They stand their ground in a different way. Yeah, so, and I feel like there is like a youthful optimism about that, and it's also a kind of anger, and it's also a fear. Yeah, so, and they're all tied to this sense of precarity.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of sort of mentioned this with your son, but where do you currently find inspiration for your work?
Right now, I have been interested in kind of 2 pieces. The first is, this idea of writing toward the future. I'm really interested in the verb to ancestor. So this idea of becoming someone else's ancestor and therefore being accountable to the future in a different way is just, it's interesting to me. It's engaging, and it's frightening in terms of its earnestness. So that's one. And the other piece right now that I've just been kind of finding is just a different sense of balance, I guess, in my lines. And that came from working with Alicia Stallings, or A.E. Stallings, a poet at the Banff Center this summer, where Stallings' lines just have a different sense of weight or balance and a confidence in where they end before the next one begins. So trying to find space to breathe at the same time is the interplay. So this idea of looking to the future, but also being here in the body when I'm reading and writing.
And what led you to want to apply for the City of Nanaimo's Poet Laureate position?
I am so invested in getting my neighbors and my wider community out into conversation with the language that we use, right? And I think of poems as this opportunity to be attentive to the difficulties of expressing ourselves. And I just want to invite people into that, because often I hear, especially around poetry specifically, that people are like, oh, it's not for me. I don't really know how to engage with that form or that kind of writing. And I always just see it as our most precise language. And so I think of it in every conversation where we're trying to convey something we really mean. That's our opportunity to speak to one another more deeply. And so I wanted to just kind of bring that into my own life. I'm interested in being in Nanaimo long term. And I wanted to just look beyond my teaching practice, which I love at the university, at Vancouver Island University, but also just to kind of invite others into this finicky, precise, delightful craft, just to kind of to wonder or to revel together. So that's kind of if it's okay for me to also talk about this, but like the central piece that I'm really interested in as Poet Laureate is kind of shifting this idea from just me offering poetry to the community and instead inviting community members into a sense of engaging with prompts almost. So my goal is to kind of sprinkle the wider city with little opportunities to stop and reflect on our own histories and contexts while we're in a definitive place. So thinking about the histories and the contexts of this place alongside what we bring in our own stories. And so, ideally in the next little while, you'll start seeing little prompts popping up, and they are invitations to the community to kind of to get engaged with the own poems of their lives.
Almost make them become the poet.
Yes, absolutely. Because I really think we all are, and I know that sounds kind of glib, but it just consider, I always say to my students the same thing, consider the last time that you told someone you loved them, and there's a moment of precarity there where we're uncertain whether we mean the same thing. The biggest disaster, right, often can be like, oh, I love you too, as a friend, or whatever it might be. It's like, oh, there's been a misunderstanding here in the way that we express ourselves. Those are the moments of the poem. The moment of the poem to me is that sense of slipperiness in our language where we just want to find a fresh or new way to express that same sentiment to be certain that it comes across in the way that we intend, but then also relinquishing that control, because you can't control it once it once it arrives in the world. There are things like mishearing, right, or misrecognizing the intention of language, and the poem has to make space for that. And I think that the more we think about our language in that way, the more we think about our responsibility around our language, the more just fascinating and dynamic our lives can become.
You sort of mentioned this, but what are you most looking forward to in this position?
The other piece that I'm so excited about is that it's my goal to put on a reading series where before we have a poet attend that we can listen to and engage with, we perhaps have a chance to do like a little reflective workshop, either right before the reading or in the week before the reading. We're still kind of sorting out details around that. But I would really love to create spaces where the poems become personal and become a part of our own lives before we hear them shared by the poet themselves. So that's kind of one of the pieces that I'm most excited about, is just this chance for community to be together when we're just reading difficult and complex and exuberant things, right? So that's the one piece. The other piece that I'm just really looking forward to is just having a role as poet in the city. It's still a really absurd predicament for me, and I just really want to show up in my most just welcoming form. I just want people to really have a chance to engage together around language.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think a city or a community of Nanaimo needs a poet laureate? Or needs poetry in general?
I really think that we need poems because now is the time to really pay attention to the words that we use, the weight behind them, and also to really just engage with how complex it can be to convey a message. And so I think that that's something that everyone should be invited to engage with and to reckon with, because it's a tricky reckoning. And I think it can also just lead to so many illuminating and inspiring moments in our personal lives when we think about the role of the poem in our own vicinity. So I want to bring that to the city. I want to advocate for it. I think I'm just at a juncture in my life where advocating for the arts just feels really, really compelling and really important. And I just feel so delighted that I get to have the opportunity to put that forth.
And as a poet laureate, your position is to write poetry and make art that reflects the city and the community. How does somebody do that? Like, how do you write about a city?
I always have found that when I have a distinct project that I have to fulfill, the only way to really arrive at the project is to look at it a little bit peripherally, right? So, my poems in my latest collection are often set per se in Nanaimo. They just have, they have places pop up. They have creatures or plants popping up that are just from the life that is kind of guiding them, which is my own life. And so I'm kind of actually just going to take that approach to writing poems to this place and about this place and thinking with this place and the people who live here, just to kind of let things kind of seep in. That's why I like to walk around with a notebook, right? And it's just noticing something in someone's front yard, or noticing a particular kind of dynamic draft going through the streets, whipping up something. Those are those moments where I just let my body be permeable and let things affect me. And I think that they show up in the poems in interesting ways.
And I'm just going to ask, do you have any favorite locations to sit there and write, or to walk around and write?
I never sit outside. So when I'm working, I've tried, but I end up just looking at stuff. And that kind of, I have in the past been called a poet of observation. I'm actually trying to renovate that, or to shift it as my position, because I want to be a little bit more active or engaged or even activist in my poems. But for me, it's just kind of letting memories swirl together or overlap. I love the idea of the palimpsest, so language stacked on top of language, so something new emerges. And I often think that's how I accumulate my own experiences when I'm in the world as a writer. So then I go home, I dream about it, and then 6 months later, the poem comes out. I'm a very slow worker, really, really slow writer.
Well, do you want to maybe explain a little bit about your writing process?
Yeah, totally. I just love to draft and draft and draft. And I think that the other part of being a poet that I would love to offer to the city and to my neighbors and to this community is that there is a really distinct, terrifying joy that comes from sharing your drafts with someone you trust. And so for me, most of my time spent writing is also time spent conversing with other poets whom I admire and feel grateful to share my own work with, and vice versa. I love being the first reader of someone else's poem as well. And so it's that act of engaging not just with the moment, but also with that time to refine and reflect in community that I think is so central to the poem, and often gets lost because, you don't see the poets out and about that much. Maybe you'll see one writing on a bench somewhere, but usually we're squirreled away, half in dream, right? And it's the moment of sharing the draft and being afraid that it maybe will land differently than imagined. That is just such a radical space for creation and creativity. And it is integral that there is someone else there, right? Whether it's an audience, whether it's a workshop, or whether it's a single other person. That's kind of like central to my process, is the moment where I take a big gulp and then share that thing that's fresh and feels ready to share.
And you'll be working with City of Nanaimo's Youth Poet Laureate. What advice do you have for young people wanting to get into poetry, or that are just now starting their poetry journey?
I think that starting out involves just feeling empowered to take the risks. And I'm someone who always likes to mitigate risk by not really speaking until things are perfected. I'm trying to let go of that. I hope this interview is not too much of an indicator of that. But it's that act of just like getting pen to paper or using a typewriter, getting engaged with language in a different way. Sure, of course, screens can be useful to us as well, using your notes app on your phone. But it's just like anytime you get that idea of the earworm or just a phrase that you can't get out of there, put it down, save it for later, come back to it in 6 months. And whether it's just it turns into part of your own journey as someone who's growing, or something that you choose to refine or try to publish, there's something so distinctive and wonderful about working with the immediacy of our language when we're just in the moment, and then saving it for later when we want to craft something. So I would just always empower young people just to like take that time to reflect. I feel like the present moment is so divided with just all the sensory things that can take us out of, I don't know, just being here or being together, that the act of writing actually has become more and more radical, I think, as time goes on, especially writing on paper or writing in some sort of physical form, collaging the language of a cut-up magazine, whatever it might be, but just getting into the tactile and the tangible parts of being someone who communicates with others with language. Mm-hmm.
And for my final question, what do you want the residents of Nanaimo to know about you, or what you'll bring as you take on this new Poet Laureate position?
Ooh. The thing I most want the residents to know, and I would just say my neighbors to know, and these community members to know, is that the idea of the poet that you may have, this idea of the poet as someone who's displaced or squirreled away, is really not how I see my role here. I'm so excited to hear the language that y'all are going to create together. And I'm so excited just to hear the stories of your lives as you start to craft your own poems. That's what I think is like just going to be the biggest gift for me, is the opportunities where I can converse and share and take risks together and being present together.
You're listening to Midcoast Morning. We're hearing a conversation between CHLY reporter Lauryn Mackenzie and Nanaimo's new Poet Laureate Neil Surkan. While he was visiting the CHLY studio, Surkan read some poetry.
These are some poems from my manuscript in progress. It feels like kind of a completed manuscript at this point, so I'm just starting to kind of think of it as a book on its own. And this is actually the first poem from that collection, which is called Empties. And the poem is called Brackish, which is that water where the ocean starts to meet the river, and we get kind of like a half salty substance. Brackish. Yes, it is both river and sea. Yes, they mingle together here. Yes, one empties for the other. Yes, it tastes like tears. This is a poem called Endurance, and it's about looking toward the future. Endurance. Were grief a state of healing, and not the act of paying attention to what will have been, what's now disappearing from the earth, I would teach you to believe in reflourishment. Instead, you must learn endurance in the face of all that won't be saved. My chick, who hatched among the egg-lumped coils of a dozing snake, while I clung to the nest and sang.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Nanaimo's new Poet Laureate Neil Surkan speaking with CHLY reporter Lauryn Mackenzie.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. Support and grow our nonprofit newsroom project today at chly.ca/donate with a monthly or one-time donation. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
Jackie Wong is going to highlight lost intersections in a new temporary public art exhibition that will appear next spring. It'll bring attention to the sites of the city's old Chinatowns, highlighting the history and contributions of Chinese people to Nanaimo in spaces where much of the physical evidence of that contribution is no longer present.
Hi, I'm Jackie Wong. I am a artist, curator, and art educator. I am currently a retired high school art teacher who's still working in the district, subbing, like TOCing. My work is very wide-based. I use different media, so multimedia artist. And I'm excited because this is my first public art commission.
That commission is called Lost Intersections, which is a very evocative name. Can you tell me a bit about where that comes from and what the project's origin story is?
So I am somewhat returning to Vancouver Island. I haven't lived here for a bit, and I returned and moved to the area. And I had quite a big question about the Chinese community here. I am a Chinese-born Canadian. My parents were both born here. My family came all the way back in 1907. but I'm very tied to my heritage. While living in Vancouver, I go to Chinatown at least once a week. And so when I came back here, I thought, oh, I should go check out the Nanaimo Chinatowns. Found out there aren't any left, really. And also, I had an uncle who's has passed, but he used to tell me about his growing up in Nanaimo, and there was a huge Chinese community. So it's quite significant the role the Chinese played in the whole developing of the city of Nanaimo. Yet there's very little indication of so. So I dug a little deeper and I looked to see where the Chinatowns were. And the lost intersections is can you take it literally? Is there's intersections in the city of Nanaimo that were once the locations of these Chinatowns, but there's no sign of them. It can also mean, and more conceptually, that there was an intersection between the Chinese community and the non-Chinese community working together to build the city and develop it economically and culturally. And those have been lost also because many of the Chinese who immigrated into Nanaimo to work in the coal mines disappeared because the coal mine industry disappeared also. So those lost intersections of culture, community, and the populations has disappeared also.
So how are you going to approach all of that, conveying all of that through art?
So I wanted my art to make the public or the viewer question what the art was and why it was there. And then maybe themselves delve a little deeper into the significance of the art piece. So my art piece is, again, I would say it's somewhat conceptual. It is more idea based kind of art more than it's not a pretty painting or something for them to look at. So the premise of the work is to create these markers, these placemaker markers, whatever you want to call them, to signify there was something once there. So what they are these quite small boxes that have a neon light in them. And the neon lights are the Chinese characters for 1, 2, and 3. And each box will be situated in where the previous Chinatowns were. So they're all at different locations within the city. One will be in the old downtown area, and the other two are in complete residential neighborhoods where most people, I wouldn't think, knew there were Chinatowns once there. So they'll come across they're plexiglass boxes with a gold backing and with a red neon character that will say 1, 2, or 3. And they won't be able to refer that when they see it, they'll think a red neon light in a gold box. What's it doing here? They will not know it's a Chinese character. There's no way that it won't say anything about being a Chinese character. And close to those pieces of art, there'll be a QR code, which will take them to we'll take them actually to the city's website, I believe, that will then delve deeper into a site that is just for the art, and we'll talk about the Chinatown that was there. It's not actually going to be, I don't want to be an educational piece. It's not there to educate, it's just to make people aware, and which is education also, but I don't want to be like a narration of the history of the Chinatown. So what it's going to be is I'm going to spend time in the city archives and find as many photographs as I can and create some kind of visual slideshow or film or something that will show the Chinatown.
You touched on that, the fact that this is still sort of an ongoing work in process, work in progress. When can people expect to be able to go and physically see this?
Not until sometime in the spring of 2025. Probably in April or May of some time. It's up to the city when they install it. So my work should be finished by March, I believe. So like the whole the production, the research, going to the archives, and making the websites. So not for a while.
What do you think your hopes are for when the project is completed and someone is maybe either someone who lives in Nanaimo or someone who's just coming here to visit, sees it, scans the QR code, goes to the website? What are the things you hope, sitting here as we are now, that they'll take away from it? How do you hope the way they maybe move through the world will change?
Well, it's funny because when I first thought of this project, I really wanted to make a viewer, especially a local person, definitely not a tourist, because they would not see the two in the neighborhoods, but for a person to see more than one of them. And then because if they just see one of them, they probably won't look for the QR code. They probably wouldn't even scan the QR code. I would think that they would have to go, oh my God, there's another one. And then if they see a third one, they'll be more shocked. Oh my gosh, there's another one. What are these things, right? So then it would spark some kind of inquiry into what these things are. And it might, for some people, they might know already about the Chinatowns. For others, they'll be like, wow, this is a bit of history that I never knew of Nanaimo. And I would think it would hopefully um, lend itself to some kind of more open view of how what the Chinese played, the role they played in the economic development and the cultural development of the city of Nanaimo.
Now, I know there's still a lot of time spent in the archives to come in the future before the project is released, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or ideas or reflections on what maybe the process of these lost intersections can say about maybe the world we live in now, and whether there are any parallels you see in the Nanaimo of today that you think just the basic outline of what happened, we can learn from that.
Okay, so one thing that really I guess it didn't shock me, but I guess it really made me think about how a minority was looked at in the development of the city. Because the first Chinatown, which was quite near the waterfront, well, the city of Nanaimo was pretty small at that time, but I think roughly 30% of the population was Chinese. And because it was just like now, prime real estate, it was prime real estate where the Chinatown was. And I guess the city itself felt like that this community was not worthy of this real estate. So they moved the Chinatown farther up the hill from the ocean. So it was no longer close to the water. And that happened for the second Chinatown, moved to another location. But there's a kind of a fourth Chinatown that I've researched very close to the third Chinatown, but it burnt down. And they never rebuilt the Chinatown because they felt like the Chinese people in the community had already integrated with the non-Chinese community and had become part of the bigger society. So they felt they didn't need a Chinatown. So that's two things that right there is like saying that, I don't want to use the word worth, but like how important was this culture to the city? And yet, how was it not kind of accepted or made an important role to the development of the city? Because if you look at other major cities in the world, the Chinatowns are a big part of the city, right? Yeah, Nanaimo had this great history, but the history's gone. It's like visibly gone. The history's not gone, but the visible history and that part of the culture is gone. I mean, I don't know what the population, I tried to look up Stats Canada, don't know what the current Chinese population is of Nanaimo. To maybe there's not enough Chinese people to keep a Chinatown going. I have no idea. That's something I'm going to have to look deeper into. So I just think that to me, the art is, it's supposed to trigger some kind of inquiry, or someone's like, thinking of like, wow, these Chinese people play this role, but we haven't really made any kind of marking to show how important they were.
Do you have any reflections on maybe the idea that if you were to drive down the road, down the Malahat to Victoria, you would see a Chinatown that very much feels like it's celebrated and part of the essential infrastructure of Victoria, whereas the name of the project and everything we've been talking about, lost intersections, maybe a different situation in Nanaimo?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, the Victoria Chinatown's amazing, and it's kind of funny because my mother was born in Chinatown in Victoria, literally right in the middle of Chinatown. They had an apartment, and to her, that's when she goes back there, like that's a huge part of her. And my father was born in the Chinatown in Vancouver, same thing. And like, so my uncle who's passed, like when he went back to Nanaimo, wasn't anything left. He moved eventually to Vancouver, like most of the Chinese people did. They moved to the lower mainland, but there was nothing, no memories there. Like the memories are there, but there's no visual, lasting physicality of it. It's kind of sad.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation or to let people know about the topic or your upcoming art project?
Well, I'd also like to there's a bit of a history why I'm doing the actual physical 1, 2, and 3 and in the gold light box. So neon lighting was a big part of all Chinatowns in North America. That is where if you think of Vancouver and the Don Me sign and Victoria, those were all that's lighting. That's original lighting from the 1950s, right? And so I really felt it was important to add that kind of nostalgic kind of feel to it, to say this is what Chinatowns were, and they still use a lot of. And if you go to the museums, there's neon lights from the Chinatowns in museums, because it was such a significant part of the vibrance, the physical lighting vibrance of the city. And then gold is, Chinese good luck is gold and red. So that's why I've used the combination of the red lighting on a gold backing. So someone might see that and may have some kind of reference to Asian prosperity and happiness and good luck with all those things that come with the red and the gold. I don't know, but to me, that was really important to have in these pieces.
I'm also wondering maybe about the relics, maybe the artifacts. I'm not sure the most appropriate term to use that do still remain. For example, I'm thinking of the China steps right near the radio station, or on Stewart Ave, the Chinese Pioneer Cemetery, I believe it is, or memorial, as well as the town site Chinese cemetery. What are your thoughts of maybe the physical spaces that remain as you approach this project?
Well, I'm not so familiar with where the Chinese cemetery is. I haven't really delved into that. I think it's important, but I think also the Chinese cemeteries and anything else that marks where some kind of heritage of the Chinese people, the Chinese culture, I think it's really important that the links to those are always going to be a significant part of the city of Nanaimo, and that these lights are only temporary. They're not. This public art is temporary. It's a 5-year. I think it's 5 years they'll be there for, and so they're going to be gone. Again, the lost intersections will be lost after 5 years, and so my art is not like those places, like the steps and the cemeteries that are everlasting. Hopefully, mine will not be. So it's kind of sad that after mine have gone, because one of them is literally going to be placed probably in a co-op garden. That's where it exists now, is a co-op garden. It's the only place that we could find that would be able to physically be posted. And when that art is gone, only maybe the people who looked into that QR code or live right there and saw it every single day for 5 years will really know somewhere that there was a Chinatown there. Again, it'll be lost to all the other people who did not experience the art for overlapping time. So, I think it's important that they actually, be kept as heritage, city heritage and everything else. From what places you're talking about.
And certainly when I came across this project, I think that irony wasn't lost on me. Is there any way, have you looked at it or even had any informal conversations about after the temporary art project is over, is there kind of any kind of chance of something like this, or even the QR code staying in those places?
No, we haven't talked about that at all, because the public art, it's not meant the neon and plexiglass box. I don't even know how long that would last for physically through weather and everything else. So they'll be gone. I'm sure they will not last after the 5 years. No, the city hasn't. It would be great though to see what the response is of the city and the public, right? To see if people even notice them, if people even care about them. That's what I'm really interested in, right? Did it spark anyone's interest?
Well, Jackie Wong, thank you so much for taking the time to speak about it with me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And hopefully, the city will come walk around and see them.
Jackie Wong is the artist behind Lost Intersections, a temporary public art project coming to Nanaimo in spring of next year. It will highlight the sites of the city's old Chinatowns. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.